Good evening, Mr. Young here. This is the second video in the airports challenge, and we left the last video where we just completed section 4 of the challenge, and I said that I was going to go and see if we could do things a slightly different way, and today we're going to go through that different way. And so if you take, for example, AQA in GCSE, then you should know all about dictionaries, the same for OCR. Unfortunately, the Cambridge International GCSE does not cover dictionaries until year 13 or A level. And so what I'm about to go through now is not actually dealt with until A level, but for everybody else it's dealt with at GCSE. So if you remember from the last lesson, we had this CSV file that we needed to read in, and it's stated in here that we need to read that into we need to read it in, and I chose to initially set an array so that we could have a two-dimensional array of airports. The thing about that is that by virtue of that, when we wanted to do this check here, which is the check that we have an airport, we have to do this linear search. Now, the reality is in this case, we have 4 or 5 different items. And so in this case, this is probably the easiest way to do it. But in order so that we can learn and extend our understanding, I'm going to show you an alternative way using a dictionary, which takes this from, if you're doing A level, an ON to an O1 operation. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to be a dictionary, and that's going to give us a few issues, but effectively we need to now change how we're reading this in. So the way that I would deal with this dictionary, and I'll give it an idea, in fact I'll just give you an example down here, is that I would use the airports as the key. So I would have JFK as the key, and then if you wanted, you could just store all that data in an array in any event, or you could store that data in a further dictionary with something like, we need the code, which is always going to be, of course, JFK, and we would have then the name, and that would be John F. Kennedy, and hopefully you get the point, because now what we can do, if we do it this way, then we can have something like distance, caps lock again, dist to LPL, and instead of having to have that as a string, we can now have that as an integer. Put on here, and of course we can have distance to BOH, and that would be 5, 4, 8, 6, and that would be the shape of the data, or what we call the schema of the data. Now, because we have the code here, then we don't actually need to put the code here. You can do if you want. I'm going to do it like this. We know the key is the airport code, and then we have these 3 individual sub keys and values of this dictionary. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take us back to where we were before and go back to this code up here, and just because I want to make sure I'm only dealing with that, I'm just going to simply read airports, go back to where we were, and print airport, so we can see what that looks like and make sure it all works perfectly fine. So once we have this data strip, we have an array, of items, and what we can say is that the airports at, and of course the airport data at 0 will hold the code, and we can then say that that is equal to, and we can create this dictionary where we can say, what did we say? We said that name is, of course we need to put that in quotation marks. I've been doing too much JavaScript recently, and that would be airports data at 1, and I'm just going to copy and paste this, and we can then have distance to LPL. I'll do that all lowercase, or at least I'll try, and we want distance to, or let's say to, it says from, let's just keep it consistent, distance from BOH, and that would be the airport data at 2 and 3. And so now if I run this, hopefully you'll see that we have a dictionary. The key here is JFK, and then the value is a dictionary, and then we have another key, ORY, with a name, and so that is working just fine in terms of reading the data into a dictionary. Now that we've done that, let's undo this, and how can we change this? Well, we can use the simple, we can say if the overseas airport, and that really is the code, is in airports, well, in fact, if it's not in airports, then we can say simply invalid airports. Otherwise, we would do airports at, the selected airport is the here, overseas airports, and we want to select the name. And so hopefully now if we try and run that and we select 1 and we enter BOH and then MAD, and you can see when we enter MAD it says the selected airport name is that. And so we have reduced the requirement now for a linear search. We can just do an O1 dictionary search, and we've also reduced the we've allowed us to have integers, so we can store disparate data types such as integers and strings all in the same dictionary, rather than having to hold an array of strings and then convert the airport data such as these two distances to an array, to an integer later on. And so that is another way of holding the information. Now that I've done that, I'm going to keep with that, although we may decide against it at a later date. Of course, if we were doing this with the full 20 hours, then we would have thought about this in a little more detail and decided which path was the better path. So now I'm going to move on to question 5. And so if the user enters the flight details, so we want to create a method called, let's call it enter flight. Let's just be more specific, enter flight details, and we'll just finish that off for the moment. And then if they enter in 2 here, we can do enter flight detail. And so the user should be asked to enter the type of aircraft to be used. Well, here's the thing, is this is the data, and we're going to need this data, so we're going to need to store this data in some structure. So there are two separate ways of doing this, and let's think how we can do that. Let's think about what we're doing. So we could say something like, we could go back, as I said before, we have a grid which suggests it could be a 2D array, and this is the aircraft, so we're going to call it air, and I know that it's singular, aircraft, even though it's a thing, but just to be consistent I'm going to call it aircrafts. And of course we could then say something like medium narrow body, and sorry, this should be inside its own array, and 8, so remember we have to put that in speech marks, and 2650 for the maximum flight, and we're calling standard, let's call it well, so it's 180 is the actual information. Again, it's got to be as a string, and 8 for our first class. And we could then, and of course, although Python allows us to do that, it would be not how we would have that as a true array, and we could do it like this. But in the same way, I think that a better structure, given that we've got a mixture of string and integer, particularly everything apart from the type here is a string, then we can deal with it that way. The only thing is that in this particular case, given what we need to do, I think that we either need to keep it like this or have a separate array just for the type, because what we know is that an array, sorry, a dictionary is not ordered. So I'm just going to update this, and I'm going to keep it this way specifically for this reason. Large narrow body and a medium wide body, and I'm just going to put this information in. That's 7 and 5, and that's 5600 and 4050. And I am going to come back and change this later, but I want to explain what I'm doing here so we can see the what I would call the simple way of doing this. So that's 8 and 10 and 14. Now, of course, like I said, Python will allow you to mix and match, and you may choose to do that given that you're writing it in Python, but I'm going to try and be consistent here that an array is of only one data type. So that's our aircraft. So now the next question is, again, if I'm thinking this through, is that the user should be asked to enter the type of aircraft. Now, if you ask the user to enter medium narrow body with a capital M, they're going to make some error. So what I would do is I would say something like, for I in range, well, actually I wouldn't do it that way. I would say for I for aircraft in aircrafts, and I would do print. Now let's do it for I in range because I want to keep it. So we could do I comma aircraft in enumerate aircrafts, and that will give us both the I and the aircraft at the same time. But of course you might not be familiar with that, so just to make sure, I'm just going to go and do it the long way, and we want to do it in the range of len aircrafts, and then I'm going to go print, and I want to do first of all I want to put I in there, so I'm going to say str of I plus, I'm going to put a dot, and then I'm going to put a space, and then I'm going to add aircrafts, aircrafts at I, and we want the first item in the array, which is this one here. And this way we will hopefully get a nice printed version of it. So let's choose to run option number 2. So let's try and run option number 2, and hopefully you'll see it says here select an option, regular, medium, large or medium, and which tallies with these two. Now what I am going to do, I think it's a little bit messy, so I'm just going to go and print, and we could use a \n here, but I think it always looks more easy to read if I do it this way. And then I'm going to do another one and then just print, so we have some space. Oops, I didn't want to do that, but we can just do BOH and Madrid. That works, number 2. And then we have this, but of course you can see it's not 1, 2, and we really want 1, 2, 3. So we can simply add that there, and let's run it again, and we'll select 2, and you can see now you can select 1, 2 or 3. That's a much safer way of doing it. So what we want to do now, of course, is ask the user to enter a choice. So let's go here and say aircraft choice is equal to input, and what does it want us to do? Let's just go back and check. Ask to enter the type of aircraft, so select the number of the type of aircraft, and does it ask you to, it says if it's not valid, so if we choose the wrong one then it's just going to return. So we know there are only 3 of them, so we can say if, and we could use that as an integer again and do it that way, but then we'd have to do a try catch for the sake of having only 3. We can say if aircraft choice is not in, and we get 1, just like we did with the other menu, 1, 2 and 3. Then we want to print in valid choice, and we can simply return. Alright, so now once we have that, it should say the data, if the type of aircraft is not, otherwise the data for figure 2 should then be displayed. Well, the data for figure 2 is all of this data, so what we can do now is we can say something like, again, for I in range len of aircrafts. That's a lie, I don't want to do that, do I? We know it's aircrafts, so we're going to say, I'm going to cache it because display craft is equal to aircraft choice, but this time we do need to convert that to an int, so we can do aircraft, we called it aircraft choice, didn't we? And again, I'm thinking maybe we could have done this with an int now, but that's why you have 20 hours rather than trying to do it off the top of your head, which is what I'm doing right now. So we should now be able to say the what do we want? Type. Let's just display print type, and then we want to do it would be display craft at 0, and we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 more of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, and this one is the, we'll just call it the running cost, and of course that is a well, we've left it all as strings at the moment, so we can do something like running cost, and we can put a pound sign here, and then maximum range, and that would be 2, and maximum range, it's standard capacity, and that is at 3, and then the last one is min first class. Oops, min first class, and that would be at 4. And then again, I think what I'm going to do is just copy this again so that we can make it a little bit more legible. And let's see what happens when we run that. If I enter number 2, I enter, well, if I enter F, it's going to go and say it's an invalid choice. I'll try again, and this time I want a medium narrow body, and what do we get? Index error, index out of range, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and display craft line 60, which line is it? Line 65. Here is aircraft choice. Let's just see what aircraft choice that should be. That should be 1. That should be okay. And let's have put a breakpoint on here, and then we can always try and see what's going on. So I'm going to select 2, and then I'm going to select 1, and aircraft choice is 1. We should have the int of that, which should be give us 1, and aircraft, well, of course it's not aircraft choice, it's aircrafts, you see. So it's always helpful to go and check where you've made silly mistakes like that. So we try it again. Go with 2, we'll go with 1, and you can see here that it is the large narrow body, which is now of course again we're silly because we now need to convert that back to this one here, so we need to do all of that 1 minus 1. So again, don't panic when you see these things, tiny little things that keep so now we have the medium narrow body, which is number 1, 8 pounds, 2650, 180 and 8. And so let's see how much of number 5 we've done. So the user should then be asked the number of first class seats. If it's not 0, then the number of first class seats is less than the minimum number, and that's, well, we've gone through quite a lot on this video today, so I'm going to leave this and deal with E or D onwards in the next video. So I hope that's been helpful. I'm Miss Young, and I'll see you later.